Windsor at the dawn of the 1970s. For 20 years, this castle had been the Queen's private family sanctuary. This is where she raised her 4 children. She had to balance an extraordinary job with keeping her mother happy and her husband out of trouble. The Queen loved Windsor ever since she was a little girl. The old castle held so many warm memories of her childhood, filled with horses and dogs. This meant family, her parents. It was also the very place her romance with Prince Philip blossomed, and in 1972, they prepared to celebrate that bond. November 20th marked the Queen and Prince Philip's 25th wedding anniversary. A carriage parade rolled through London to St. Paul's Cathedral, topped off with a grand state dinner. The entire royal clan gathered at Windsor, inside the White Drawing Room, for a landmark family portrait. A portrait of a relaxed, united family would soon grace front pages worldwide. Such images were absolutely crucial for the House of Windsor. They had to show a royal family that was happy, contented, and entirely devoted to duty and to each other. It was a vital way to project the stability of the monarchy. But it is a dangerous game. It relies entirely on everyone staying together, otherwise you only build yourself up to get knocked down. Over the next 20 years, this smiling family fractured. Bitter divisions took over as 4 separate marriages collapsed in public scandal. Windsor became home to one of the unhappiest families in Britain, their deepest secrets slowly spilling out past the castle walls. The first deep crack in the facade appeared 4 years later, on February 22nd, 1976. Sitting down to Sunday breakfast with the morning papers, the Queen received a brutal shock. Splashed across the front of the News of the World was Princess Margaret in her swimsuit, standing next to her new toy boy, Rhodey Lou, a man 17 years her junior. The trouble was, Margaret was still very much married. She and photographer Tony Armstrong-Jones had been together for 16 years. With 2 children, they seemed like the perfect couple. But now the secret was out. The Queen's own sister was having an affair. It was a seriously juicy scandal. Those photos of Princess Margaret on the beach at Mystique with Rhodey Lou shocked everyone. This was a wild new departure for a royal princess. That single photo changed everything. It was like pulling the cork right out of a shaken bottle. A flood of intense speculation followed. The moment Princess Margaret flew back from her holiday, she fled straight to Windsor to escape the media circus. But her marriage was under intense scrutiny, and there was plenty to uncover. Behind closed doors, the family knew this marriage had been on the rocks for years. From day one, Margaret and Tony clashed. Even Windsor Castle itself became a major source of friction. Margaret loved spending her weekends there, keeping rooms at Royal Lodge with the Queen Mother. Tony preferred to escape the in-laws completely, heading down to his own cottage in Sussex. Margaret was desperate for a permanent country home in Windsor Great Park. The Queen even went as far as offering them a site at Sunning Hill. The princess refused to leave Windsor. It was where she had grown up, after all. This stubbornness soured relations between the couple for quite some time. Throughout their marriage, Margaret spent quiet, lonely weekends at Windsor, often spotted hitting the town entirely on her own. By then, she seemed to hit absolute rock bottom. People noticed her drinking heavily. She was just an incredibly unhappy woman. Her fling with the 23-year-old Rhodey Lou was not her first affair, but previously she had always been careful enough to escape detection, but not this time. Now, her family at Windsor had to face a truly unthinkable reality. Once, while strolling through the gardens at Royal Lodge, a lady-in-waiting suggested to the Queen Mother that a divorce was the only real option left for Margaret and Tony. And the Queen Mother asked in near horror, "Oh, do not tell me you actually agree with divorce." Divorce in the 1970s was a massive deal. Back then, divorced people were not even allowed inside the royal enclosure at Ascot. In many ways, this began to puncture the myth of the perfect family that the monarchy worked so hard to project. Divorce was a dirty word back then. Having your own sister go through it was incredibly uncomfortable. But Margaret was completely determined, and the Queen had no choice but to agree. In March 1976, the separation was announced. I was right there with Princess Margaret when the news broke. The broadcast began. We are now announcing the divorce of Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon. I quickly turned it off, but she snapped, "No, Griffin, turn it back on. I want to hear what they are saying about me." So I switched the radio back on. It was a painful moment, and I felt desperately sad that it had to end this way. 2 years later, the first divorce of a senior royal since Henry VIII was officially finalized. The timing could not have been worse, with Britain caught in the grip of a severe economic crisis. All through the 70s, Britain suffered relentless strikes while inflation spiraled to over 20%. While regular people struggled just to get by, Princess Margaret's lavish lifestyle was splashed all over the papers. But she wasn't alone. The entire royal family seemed to sail on completely untouched by reality. The ancient walls of Windsor Castle provide the backdrop for an age-old British tradition bestowing the prestigious insignia of the Order of the Garter. Instead of colorful pageantry, events like this incredibly expensive annual parade made the royals look completely out of touch with a struggling nation. People started asking what exactly they were paying for. There was a much stronger anti-monarchy sentiment back then compared to what we see today. Traditional deference was dying out fast. Giving a loud, chaotic voice to this angry new cultural mood were rebellious punk bands, most notably the Sex Pistols. Punk rock was the wildest new musical trend, loud, aggressive, and determined to tear down the British establishment. Yet, if 1977 belonged to punk, it was an even bigger milestone for the Queen. It was her Silver Jubilee. She was set to light a massive beacon at Windsor Castle, sparking grand celebrations across the country. Behind closed doors, royal aides panicked. They had no idea if the public would even bother to celebrate. Broadcasters kept calling me, asking if the whole thing was about to turn into an absolute disaster. With that dark cloud hanging overhead, the Queen led a torchlit procession up the long walk at Windsor Castle. When the flame caught, they could only wait and pray. This was billed as a historic spectacle nobody should miss. The massive cheering crowds brought immense relief. But those fears of a quiet boycott had been totally misplaced. The Queen was greeted by adoring crowds, prompting her secretary to describe it as a genuine love affair with her people. The deep, genuine affection for the Queen was incredibly clear during those moments. It was truly extraordinary. I suppose people felt the Queen was the only thing worth celebrating. It was a chance to feel patriotic, happy, and entirely free from political divisiveness. For many, it was a deeply moving, lifelong memory. Ultimately, Britain was simply not ready for a revolution. The monarchy remained firmly in business. Their image was bruised, but they survived. Now, the royals had to look ahead. They desperately needed a new generation. In 1978, Prince Charles turned 30, but instead of settling down to secure the royal succession, the bachelor prince was busy playing the field. He spent his days at the exclusive guards polo club at Smith's Lawn, a place famous for high society partying. It was the ultimate playground. You would meet there, enjoy a long lunch, watch the match, and have afternoon tea. It was incredibly social, usually wrapping up with drinks. People went there strictly to party. Everyone mingled either at Windsor or at Annabelle's nightclub. Those were the two hot spots. It was almost completely unheard of to meet anyone except at Windsor or Annabelle's. Unbelievable, but quite true. Charles dated constantly at Smith's Lawn. His wild dating rumors made great headlines, but did absolutely nothing to secure the crown's future. By 1980, the immense pressure was mounting. That June, a 32-year-old Charles invited a new girl to Windsor. She was only 18, innocent, and full of life. Her name was Diana Spencer. Soon, she would become the most famous woman on earth, headlining a tragic royal drama. Overflowing with genuine energy and excitement, she boldly introduced herself to the lower-level castle staff with a warm handshake. It was immediately obvious that she was nothing like the typical, frosty, aristocratic women Charles had been seeing until then. Yet, 18-year-old Diana possessed an impeccable aristocratic pedigree with absolutely no past scandals to her name. The royal family adored her. The nation was completely spellbound, and she seemed the perfect match. Reporters kept asking if a wedding announcement was coming quite soon. For 6 months, the couple dated amidst heavy speculation, but no news came. With Charles dragging his feet, Prince Philip finally snapped. He sent a blunt letter telling his son to make a move, which Charles interpreted as his father forcing his hand. Yet, his close friends later claimed that forcing marriage was never his actual intention. He just wanted him to make a decision. The letter worked. On February 6, 1981, Charles brought Diana back to Windsor. He met her in a highly personal, slightly odd location, a room from his childhood where he felt safe, the old castle nursery. Charles dropped to one knee and proposed. Completely flustered, Diana instantly said yes, please. He immediately went upstairs to tell the Queen. It was an oddly cold encounter, completely devoid of any real passion or excitement. Standing in the quiet nursery, Diana surely understood the heavy expectations placed on her. Anyone destined to be Queen of England must accept that the nursery will define much of her royal life. You are not chosen for a pretty smile alone. Your job is to produce heirs that is the cold, hard reality. 6 months later, on July 29th, they wed in a lavish ceremony at St. Paul's Cathedral. Over 750 million people watched worldwide. The royal family enjoyed historic popularity, launching a massive wave of national optimism. The next year, the nation came out victorious from the Falklands War. Early on, the Americans had refused to help the British fight Argentina, only reluctantly stepping in much later. So, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher wanted to get the special relationship with the United States back on track. Only one place would do to impress the world's most powerful man, Windsor Castle. It had to be there that the Queen would host the first ever full state visit of an American president. Her guest was Ronald Reagan. The Queen told me he had come to stay for 4 days. She told me to look at all those cars outside, peeping out of the oak room window. She said to just look at them. They had come to check out her castle to make sure it was safe. Can you believe the cheek? She said if it was safe enough for her, why was it not safe enough for him? Persuading Reagan to visit had been tough, and Windsor Castle was the absolute key to sealing the deal. Windsor Castle sends a clear message to visiting heads of state. This fortress has stood solid as a rock for many times, their own nation's entire existence. I think President and Mrs. Reagan must have felt they walked onto a movie set, because Windsor Castle is a spectacular stage for diplomacy at the highest level. Eager to use this fairy tale backdrop, the Americans had eyed up photo opportunities for the president. One specific shot the American administration desperately wanted was of the president of the United States, the cowboy, riding side by side with the Queen of England deep into Windsor Great Park. But Reagan wanted even more an off-the-cuff press conference with the waiting reporters. This was a massive breach of royal protocol, since the Queen never answers direct questions from journalists. How do you like your horse? Beautiful. Ronald Reagan edged his horse forward. The Queen grimaced a bit, turning her horse to ride away, so Reagan announced there would be no questions today and rode off too. That evening, in the lavish St. George's Hall, the Queen hosted a spectacular state banquet for the president and 160 top movers and shakers. Every single one of the castle's 500 servants had been working flat out to get everything ready. There was the yeoman of the cellars, the yeoman of the parlor, the footmen, the under-butlers, the wine butlers, and the yeoman of the crockery. There was the yeoman of the cutlery, the yeoman of the glass pantry, the yeoman of the silver pantry, all of them coming together in one place. Preparation starts first thing in the morning when they bring out the long table, no tablecloth. Of course, that is considered far too middle class. Next, the palace steward measures every single setting with a ruler. He does not want to reach the end only to find someone has fallen off. This performance has to be absolutely perfect. It is mind-boggling. An army of silverware stares at you, 1,150 knives, forks, and spoons. Then there is a regiment of glassware, 630 crystal glasses. You can do the math yourself. There are 5 for every single setting. Guests eat from solid gold plates and drink from George III crystal goblets. It is unbelievable. It all came down to precision speed. The Queen put on the perfect show with Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and the entire royal family attending that night. This historic place symbolizes both tradition and renewal, as generation after generation of your family makes it their home. We in America share your excitement about the upcoming birth of a child to the Prince and Princess of Wales, praying that God continues to bless your family with health and wisdom. Windsor Castle, its dedicated staff, and its sheer grandeur had once again done their job. But Windsor is also steeped in deeply personal royal traditions. Back in the 1840s, Victoria and Albert celebrated Christmas at Windsor, creating the very scenes we now consider traditionally British. In 1982, with an expanding family, the Queen decided to revive that Victorian tradition. Christmas would now be spent at Windsor instead of Sandringham, and it was just as well the castle had plenty of room. We are not just talking about guests arriving with a suitcase. The Queen Mother used to travel with actual oil paintings to completely refurnish her rooms, and she had pets too. There were dogs running amok everywhere. The Queen Mother had 2 corgis, the Queen had 9 plus a Labrador, and Princess Margaret brought her Dachshund Pipkin. The place was basically a kennel. Decorating the trees at Windsor that year felt like stepping back into history. The Queen's great-great-grandparents had loved turning Windsor into a true winter wonderland for their own holidays. Prince Albert, who was an aesthete and loved surrounding himself with beauty, created these gorgeous winter interiors for the Windsor Christmas. There were Christmas trees all over the room, and in some years he even suspended trees ablaze with burning candles directly from the ceiling. Victoria and Albert even released pictures of their festive celebrations. These images became hugely popular, sparking a nationwide, lasting craze for decorated holiday trees. Yet those pictures were about far more than just holiday decorations. The royal couple exploited a brand new craze to project a powerful image across both the nation and the empire. Victoria and Albert were very early adopters of new technology, including the art of photography. They actually went so far as to build a darkroom inside Windsor Castle to develop photos of themselves, showing just how deeply they were interested in this new technology. But it is also highly significant because we are witnessing the very birth of royal spin. Victoria used photography to promote the image of a modest, thrifty, and dressed-down monarchy that she wanted to present to the public. Combining photography with their vision of Christmas was a masterstroke depicting the holiday in etchings, prints, and later photographs for the masses. The public got to see their queen and her husband looking perfectly content, gathered around a wholesome Christmas tree. Queen Victoria leaked these portraits to the papers, proving that a decent moral family lived inside Windsor Castle. Together, she and Albert crafted an incredibly powerful image, a normal, happy family with all their children gathered close. It worked wonders on Victorian society. In fact, it was so effective that even today, this is how the royals present themselves. These pictures were pure propaganda, protecting the crown during a time when anti-royal sentiment was spreading fast. Nearly 150 years later, Queen Elizabeth sat comfortably at the head of her own table. Margaret's old divorce was forgotten. Charles had settled down, married, and secured an heir. Finally, the Queen's weekend escapes to Windsor could actually be relaxing. Every Friday afternoon after lunch, I would load the Queen and her 9 corgis into her small rover. 2 corgis watched from the back window, 2 sat on her lap, 2 right beside her, and the rest huddled at her feet. It was a car crammed with dogs and royalty. 30 minutes later, she was out in the fresh air with her animals. With the 5,000-acre Great Park right outside her door, horses ruled the Queen's weekends at Windsor. This was where she first learned to ride, having received her very first pony, Peggy, at just 4 years old. She loved animals from the start, once saying she wanted to marry a farmer just so she could keep plenty of horses and dogs. That freedom to ride was what truly made Windsor her favorite place, a sanctuary she cherished ever since she was a little girl. Horses offered her a quiet escape from the heavy burdens of state, becoming an absolutely essential part of her daily life. The old joke at Windsor went horses, dogs, husband, then kids. That was her world. Whenever she was at the castle, she rode as much as she could. Locals often spotted her even in her later years enjoying a quiet ride through the great park wearing her classic headscarf. On Saturday mornings, she simply had to walk down a small flight of stairs, slip through the dog door, cross her garden, and she was at the stables. These stables are massive and highly private, with an indoor riding school and stalls for over 100 horses. But that is only half of it. For decades, she kept a massive racing stable nearby. She remained a top owner in the country with horses worth an estimated 42 million. She even had her own private racecourse built right on the grounds of the Windsor estate. Whether basking in the sun or resting under the great shade trees, it was a picture-perfect Ascot opening day straight out of My Fair Lady. Naturally, just like the movie, people love to show off. This famous racecourse was originally built by Queen Anne back in 1711. Every June, Royal Ascot Week was locked into the Queen's schedule as one of the absolute premier horse racing events in the world. The Queen loved this week because it was packed with horses, giving her a rare chance to show off just a little bit by presenting her absolute best thoroughbreds to the entire racing community. She absolutely adored the whole thing. It was all about dressing up and taking in the vibrant, absolutely spectacular colors of the crowd. Sunlight filtered down through the trees onto the paddock, reflecting off gleaming, beautifully polished top hats, stunning horses, and millions of pounds worth of raw talent. The Queen never missed a race, and her own stable won 71 times. Her most famous victory came when her horse Estimate won the Gold Cup. It was probably the first time anyone had ever witnessed her cheering and looking completely deliriously happy. It was a beautiful sight, this incredibly sensible, private woman just letting her raw emotions flood out. But the Queen was not the only one finding passion at Ascot. In 1985, Princess Diana invited her close friend Sarah Ferguson to the daily lunch at Windsor. She ended up sitting right next to Prince Andrew. Throughout that first lunch, the two of them sat side by side. There was plenty of playful flirting, feeding each other from their forks and fooling around with bread rolls. She was like a hyper bouncy Labrador bounding into the royal family, and Prince Andrew was completely smitten with her. Sarah was a far cry from Andrew's usual type. He typically dated glamorous blondes, most of whom were actresses. Fergie was none of those things, just red hair, freckles, and pure fun. Andrew's dramatic romantic history had long been a source of shame for the royal household. They called him Randy Andy. Once a nickname like that sticks, it is almost impossible to shake off. Back in the 80s, the single prince loved hanging out at Windsor, bringing a steady stream of girls to the castle just like Charles used to do. In 1984, the 24-year-old Andrew invited a model friend into the park for a private photo shoot. She posed all over the Windsor grounds, and he proudly turned the shots into his own calendar. Far more scandalous was his relationship with American actress Koo Stark, who turned out to have starred in an adult film. Naturally, the press tore into it. Andrew spent most of his 8-day vacation dodging relentless reporters, but they finally cornered him on a flight back from Barbados. He quickly broke things off with Koo Stark, but the wild headlines kept coming and more women stepped forward. One ex, Vicky Hodge, sold a scandalous tell-all story about their brief, intense fling to the papers. It was a massive shock at the time. Naturally, the Queen was utterly horrified and desperate to step in before Andrew ruined the family name. So when Sarah Ferguson arrived in 1985, the royal family breathed a sigh of relief. She was already familiar to the Queen. After all, her father was the royal polo manager at Windsor. They shared all kinds of mutual friends and connections. Fergie was basically part of the furniture already. She was highly acceptable, and most people figured she and Andrew were a perfect match. By 1986, Andrew was safely married. The Queen wanted her favorite son kept close. She gifted the newlyweds land at Sunning Hill on the Windsor Crown Estate to build their home. But that lavish wedding gift soon triggered a wave of harsh headlines. £5 million, 16 rooms, 12 bedrooms. It featured a pool, a tennis court, and stables. It had absolutely everything they could ever want. But architecturally, the public was completely horrified. The whole place looked a bit gaudy, almost Trumpesque. It was loud and extravagant. Once she moved in, Fergie, now the Duchess of York, quickly forgot that royals are supposed to be discreet. She loved to spend cash. Her holidays were incredibly lavish. Earning a reputation for wild excess, she loved to party. Meanwhile, Sunning Hill itself became a massive financial headache with soaring bills for upkeep. The public was paying for all of it, and they were furious. Far from keeping Andrew out of trouble, Fergie was quickly becoming a massive nightmare for the Queen herself. Yet, as the 80s wound down, Fergie was the least of her worries. Whispers began leaking from behind the palace walls, rumors of a deep rift between the heir to the throne and Princess Diana. In the 15 years since the Queen's Silver Jubilee, the royal family had faced endless scandal. But despite Margaret's divorce and the wild love lives of her bachelor sons, the Queen had somehow maintained her image as the head of a respectable model family. Then came the summer of 1992. At Windsor Castle, that polished image would finally shatter forever. The jet set descended on Windsor to watch the matches while the prince arrived in his chauffeured Aston Martin, but a secret royal affair had already begun on those very polo fields. For years, Charles had been having an affair with Camilla. She was married to one of the prince's own military colleagues. By the early 90s, everyone within the royal inner circle knew the truth. Even the Queen. In the Guards regiments, there was a strict unwritten rule: you do not sleep with the wives of your fellow officers. Before long, things got so bad that one of the Queen's trusted courtiers had to step in. This courtier told her plainly that they must acknowledge the Prince of Wales was having an affair with Andrew Parker's wife, and the regiment was furious about it. The Queen simply looked down, unable to say a word. She deeply disliked confrontation. She stayed silent, fully aware that if this went public, the resulting scandal could destroy everything she had spent her life protecting. But in 1992, Diana decided to expose the truth, secretly cooperating on an explosive biography. On June 15th, the Sunday Times published the very first shocking excerpts from the book. It wasn't the photos causing a stir, but the raw details from her close friends about her failing marriage. Charles's affair with Camilla was now fully exposed. The Queen was at Windsor that day, scheduled to watch polo at Smith's Lawn. Despite the unfolding crisis, she remarkably stuck to her plans and attended the match anyway. And who did she greet that day? None other than Camilla, who at the time was viewed as the other woman, the infamous third person in the marriage of Charles and Diana. Yet there was the Queen publicly extending a warm hand of friendship to her. For the royals, the day the book leaked was just business as usual, even with camera crews swarming their every move. The Queen simply chose to rise above the noise. Her default strategy for these scandals was always the same: ignore them, pretend they are not true, and carry on. That was their starting point. If they decided a rumor was false, they could easily ignore it. And so they carried on, but this time the Queen would not be able to rise above the damage. Their happy family facade was tearing apart as years of hidden problems exploded. Princess Anne's 19-year marriage had already ended in a bitter divorce. Behind closed doors, the Queen tried desperately to save Prince Andrew's marriage to Fergie, which was also rapidly failing. She called for an urgent family summit, traveling with the Duke of Edinburgh to see the couple at Sunning Hill. To her, throwing a lifelong relationship away made absolutely no sense. The Queen spent the whole afternoon trying to convince them to stick it out for the sake of their young children, but absolutely nothing worked. Any hope of a reunion was utterly destroyed later that year when photos of Fergie's toe-sucking scandal in France leaked to the press. The House of Windsor had completely disintegrated into a mess of bitter feuds and infidelity. It felt like things could not possibly get any worse, but they did. Soon, the nation was watching a true tragedy unfold. Massive flames shot from the castle turrets, thick smoke choked the air, and the battle to save it was far from over. A priceless royal treasure house was burning. In November 1992, Windsor Castle went up in flames. The Queen rushed to the scene that afternoon, only to find large sections of her beloved home reduced to a smoking ruin. The Queen was entirely alone, a monarch surrounded by the smoldering debris of a hard-fought fire. She wore a headscarf and a mackintosh, looking like she was almost on the verge of tears. She probably was in tears. That fire at Windsor Castle felt deeply significant, almost like it symbolized the collapse of the House of Windsor. As the Queen's home lay in ashes, the image of a happy royal family dissolved with it. That confident silver wedding portrait from just 20 years earlier now seemed to belong to a completely different world, a world that was never coming back. The Windsor family was at rock bottom, discredited. Their castle needed millions in repairs, and the public had lost all faith. I used to like him a lot at one time, but now every time you read about what is going on, you think, well, I have gone right off them. There is so much going on with the royal family that people are losing faith. Anyway, this wholesome image of the royal family, the nation's ultimate family, was suddenly and massively tarnished. In a way, the monarchy has had to piece itself back together ever since, searching for a completely different way to define itself. The 1990s continued to be miserable years for the royal family, but the Queen managed to help raise the necessary funds to restore the castle. During the 5 years it took to finish the project, the family slowly began looking ahead. Reopening the castle in late 1997 marked the start of an extraordinary 10-year revival in the fortunes of the Windsor family. They hired spin doctors to craft a brand new image, while the younger royals showed off a much more relaxed side of the family. This public relations push paid off so well that by 2005, Windsor became the stage for an event that finally drew a line under the past. Charles married his former mistress, Camilla Parker Bowles, and the crowds cheered them on. By 2016, when the Queen celebrated her 90th birthday at Windsor, she was as popular as at any time in her remarkably long reign. But for this particular anniversary, there was no massive family portrait in a grand drawing room. The Windsor family seemed to have entered the modern world, presenting a more down-to-earth and realistic image of royal values. And it is likely the castle bearing their name will remain their true home. The future, Charles III, could prove even more attached to the castle than his mother. It defines them. It is in their fabric. Charles is just as enthusiastic about Windsor as his mother was, perhaps even more so. I suspect we will see him living down there full time. I can easily see a possibility where Charles himself runs state affairs directly from Windsor. The Windsor family has the security of two more kings in waiting, William V and George VII, who may well be king of the castle as we enter the next century. Windsor Castle is a massive asset for the British monarchy because it is just so incredibly solid. It is dynastic, permanent. It brings dignity, power, and prestige to the monarchy in a way no other building can. The new Windsor image is simple. In an uncertain world, they are offering stability and continuity just like the castle.